Good morning. I'm Bill Russell, the Dean of the Graduate School, and it's my privilege today to introduce this year's Madison Medalist. The James Madison Medal was established in 1973 by the Association of Princeton Graduate Alumni to be awarded by the university as the highest honor bestowed on an alumnus or alumna of the graduate school. At today's awards lecture, our honoree will receive a medal with the inscription, 2012, Lisa P. Jackson, Star 86, Chemical Engineering, dedicated public servant, inveterate mentor, tenacious protector of the environment, and champion environmental justice. Although born in Philadelphia, Lisa was raised in the 9th Ward in New Orleans. As a National Merit Scholar, she went to nearby Tulane, graduating summa cum laude in chemical engineering as the only female in the class to earn that honor. She then came to Princeton and received her master's in chemical engineering in 1986. An engineer by training and a government regulator by profession, she served on the staff of the Environmental Protection Agency for 16 years before joining the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection in 2002. She rose to the head of the department in 2006. Among her initiatives were compliance sweeps to crack down on polluters in environmentally ravaged sections of Camden and Patterson, and a plan to reduce carbon emissions 20% by 2020 and 80% by 2050. In December 2008, Lisa became the Chief of Staff for Governor John Corzine, just 2 weeks before Obama announced her selection to lead the EPA. Lisa was sworn in on January 22, 2009, as the first African American to head the EPA. She oversees a staff of more than 17,000 and an estimated budget of $10 billion. Just 15 months later, the Deepwater Horizon drilling platform exploded, killing 11 workers and spewing nearly 5 million barrels of crude oil into the Gulf. This epic disaster intensified the debate about whether the EPA was too involved in environmental regulation on industry or, as the oil spill seemed to indicate, was not involved enough. In the aftermath of the disaster, Lisa was called to testify before congressional committees 7 times in a 4-week period, but through it all, she kept her cool. In fact, Lisa is best known for her warmth and her ability to find common ground, to encourage agencies to work together without sparking territorial sensitivities. And also, she has been called, and although she's been called an evil genie by Congress Joe Borden of Texas, and accused of running the Economic Destruction Agency by Congressman Brian Bilbray of California, many others applaud and admire her ability to stand up and fight for what she believes in while remaining polite and even-tempered. Senator Jim Inhofe, ranking Republican on the Environment and Public Works Committee, and arguably Congress's biggest skeptic of clean air regulations, has said of Lisa, "I've always liked her. There's something about her. She's very lovable, a very personable person." Lisa's efforts have been recognized in many ways. In 2010 and 2011, Time magazine named her one of the 100 most influential people in the world. Other notable individuals on that list were First Lady Michelle Obama, and of course her husband, University trustee Chris Christie, and other familiar names like Mark Zuckerberg, Oprah, and Sting. Interesting company. Secretary of Energy Dr. Stephen Chu wrote Lisa's 2011 blurb for that magazine, where he stated, and I quote, As the U.S. grapples with serious energy issues, we need serious leaders like Lisa. She understands not only the risks we face, but all the opportunities to create a new generation of jobs and to grow the economy while protecting public health and the environment. She takes on her tasks with poise and pragmatism, finding common ground and common sense solutions. During this time of challenge and opportunity, she is what our nation needs, end quote. As an administrator, Lisa pledged to focus on core issues of protecting air and water quality, preventing exposure to toxic contamination in our communities, and reducing greenhouse gases. She has promised that all of the EPA's efforts will follow the best science, adhere to the rule of law, and be implemented with unparalleled transparency. She also has made it a priority to focus on vulnerable groups, including children, the elderly, and low-income communities that are particularly susceptible to environmental and health threats. Most recently, the EPA announced a new rule that will force power plants to control mercury and other toxic pollutants for the first time. Lisa has called it the Obama administration's biggest clean air action yet. Most alarmingly, mercury exposure, often a result of eating fish containing methylmercury, is known to harm the neurological development of fetuses, infants, and children, impacting cognitive thinking, memory, attention, language, and fine motor and visual spatial skills. These standards are long overdue and aim to reduce mercury pollution from burning coal by 90%, lung-damaging acid gases by 88%, and soot-producing sulfur dioxide by 41% once they are fully implemented in 2016. The EPA estimates that the rule will cost $9.6 billion annually, but will return economic and health benefits many times that. In closing, I'm pleased to welcome Lisa's husband, Kenneth, who is here. So please join me now in welcoming the 2012 Madison Medalist, Lisa P. Jackson.
Thank you. Thank you, Dean Russell. I'm sorry I didn't do better in your class, but thankfully you passed me anyway. I started to, in true Princeton tradition, I'm going to give my speech in Latin. Copies will be handed out in just a second, so we can all know when to applaud lots of times. I want to first start by saying thank you to President Tillman. Thank you for coming. Dean Russell, it's an honor. Your introduction was lovely. Thank you so much, and thanks for being here. Vice President and Secretary Bob Durkee, thank you as well. Dean Christina Paxson, Rose Lee, where's Rose, for being a constant supporter and help. President of the Association of Princeton Graduate Alumni. Henry Von Cohen, President of the Alumni Association, Elizabeth Dorman, Director, Office of Graduate Alumni Relations, and Margaret Miller, the Assistant Vice President for Alumni Affairs. And I'm leaving off lots of wonderful people, like my friend Emily over at Anglinger. So I can't name them all. Special congrats to Director Muller. Looking forward to your talk as well. Congratulations. To a very hardworking and extraordinarily effective administrator and director. All of my fellow alumni, especially, of course, members of the class of 1986. I hope there's at least one of you out there, and a special hello to my husband, who's sitting all alone, looking somewhat confused. All right, so here I am. This is the second time this month I've been this overwhelmed. I had to give the Black History Month presentation at our son's high school. It's an all-boys school on Capitol Hill. I speak to the President of the United States all the time, and there was nothing more intimidating than trying to talk to teenage boys about Black history And now this is it. This is pretty intimidating as well. So thank you for the honor. It is truly wonderful to be back in New Jersey, wonderful to be at Princeton to receive this incredible honor. And I can only say that I will add it to the list of remarkable and humbling experiences I've had since graduating from this university. I am indeed a proud alumna of this school, and it gives me great pride to be recognized with such a distinguished honor. As a graduate student, it was an extraordinary thing to come to Princeton and know that I was surrounded by and had the chance to learn from some of the brightest minds in the country and indeed the world. Coming here set the trajectory for my entire life. It is one of the reasons I spent so much of my career here in New Jersey, why I started my family here. This university is where I had the opportunity to fully immerse myself in what became one of the greatest passions of my life, the exploration of science. You see, I still think of myself, despite that career, as a bureaucrat, which I say proudly, but I think of myself primarily as a scientist. I feel it's a title that I earned here at Princeton and in my undergraduate work at Tulane, and one that I've put to use during my years at the Environmental Protection Agency. On my first day on the job as administrator, and many times since, I have reinforced the notion that science is the backbone of everything we do at EPA. It is the compass that guides every decision we make, every standard we set, every enforcement action, and every emergency response. It is at the core of our mission to protect human health and the environment, which is why the EPA has the largest scientific staff of any federal agency besides NASA. Now, with that in mind, I actually want to take my few minutes here to be highly unscientific for a moment. Because today, for a little while, I want to rely on that sworn enemy of good comprehensive science, the individual anecdotal experience. But I do this in service of the cause, so forgive me. I ultimately hope to make a point that I feel is important to science and how we approach it in the future. So let me tell my story. You see, my interest in science began with a calculator. When I was in high school, I went to an engineering summer camp. This may not seem like the kind of camp that would appeal to most kids, but there was a specific reason I wanted to go there. You see, every camper received a free calculator. It's not funny. Now, let me be clear. This was no ordinary calculator. This was the iPad of my day, and I went to this engineering camp because I couldn't afford it, and the only way I'd ever get a calculator like that was to go to this camp. But that camp at Tulane was the spark. I came to realize how much I enjoyed math and science. I studied hard and I did well. None of this struck me in any way as unique. You see, I was at an all-girls school at the time. They had science and math classes, and like all the young women around me, I did the best I could in them. It wasn't really until I began my study of chemical engineering at Tulane that I came to realize that in most cases, I was one of the few women in my classes. See, after going to an all-girls school most of my life, it was a little bit of a shock. Here at Princeton, when I received my master's degree in 1986, I was again one of the few women in the chemical engineering program. I started at the EPA as a staff scientist the year after graduation, actually 2 years after graduation, and spent the next 15 years working my way up. In that time, I witnessed firsthand the changes that took place and the doors that were opening and continuing to open, not just for me, but for all women. When I was a student, there were about 154,000 women who were pursuing master's degrees in science and engineering in America. By 2003, that number had practically doubled to 270,000 women. 50 years ago, 10% of the doctorates in science and engineering went to women. Today, that number has grown to 40%. We can see the future taking shape in the winners of the first ever Google Science Fair last year. Young women took top honors in all 3 age groups. The grand prize went to a 17-year-old for her project to improve treatment of ovarian cancer following accumulated resistance to chemotherapy drugs. 17 years old. I hope and expect that these are just the first ripples in what will be an enormous wave. I am proud to see that each year we graduate another unprecedented generation of women who are stepping up to lead the way in scientific fields. It is up to all of us to continue encouraging young women to put their intelligence and creativity to work in science and engineering, and there is so much work to do. Now, our oldest son is looking at schools right now, and we are encouraging him to at least think about smaller technical schools. We were doing pretty well till he went to USC, and I told the dean it was like bikini season, apparently, the day we hit the campus. So, it's over. But when we look at the numbers for student populations at those smaller technical schools, most of them are 70% male or 80% male. Why don't we see technical schools that are 70% female? At least one reason is that any good young male scientist would quickly figure out that he had really favorable odds of going to a school with 70 women for every 3 men, so the admissions applications would be foiled by the young men scientists. But still, there is a deeper question to consider besides numbers or quotas or any of the oversimplifications that simple statistics like these can bring one to. First, we know that the greater the number of brilliant minds tackling any single challenge, the further and faster we will advance. This has always been science's greatest tool. I also anticipate that adding more women to science is undoubtedly good news for our economy. It's clear that much of our future prosperity rests on new innovations and advances in science and technical and medical fields. President Obama has made it a priority to invest in research and development, not only because American scientists and inventors are doing critical work to our health, for our energy security, but also because we know that new ideas lead to opportunities for our economy, for American workers. Think of how far we've already come. Think of how many next big things we've already seen. And for most of history, half the team has really been sitting on the sidelines. It truly is exciting to imagine what will happen once all those talents are fully unleashed. There's even something at work beyond these factors. I believe that bringing more women into science will represent an important change in the culture of science. Now, let me be very clear before I go any further. I am not talking here about innate or genetic differences between men and women, certainly not in their competence or their aptitude. I'm happy to say that science has tried to quantify those differences for years and has failed every time. What I'm talking about is an inevitable cultural dynamic that will be at work in the years to come. One of the things I have learned from watching and working with so many strong women in my life is that to be a strong woman, you don't have to give up on the things that define you as a woman. Empowering yourself doesn't mean you have to reject motherhood or eliminating the nurturing or feminine aspects of who you are. And yet I find that in science, women are not often expected to bring these things to work. When you think about the mainstream views of science, at least from my generation, I think one of the defining characters is from, of course, Star Trek, Mr. Spock. What is a scientist? Well, after all, science is a cold field. It's logical. It can be humorless, although those of us Trekkies know that Mr. Spock really did have a sense of humor. It's absolutely emotionless. It's all about the facts, folks, really. We are pursuing nothing but the facts. But I'm also a fan of Star Trek: The Next Generation, and I was always intrigued by the character Deanna Troi. For those of you who don't remember Deanna Troi, she was a lieutenant commander. She could command the ship. She sat on the bridge. She was the ship's counselor. She was a scientist, but she was also telepathic. She was strong. She was capable. And she was very much attuned to the people around her. In fact, that was the strength most often used and called upon by her in service of the captain. That is the direction in which I would like to see our perception of science culture progress. What I'm hopeful for is a culture where women don't feel that they have to give up the things they value about themselves as women in order to reach the highest pinnacles of the profession. I don't believe the solution for women scientists is to acclimate themselves to a man's world. I believe women should make their own space in science, a laboratory of our own. Again, this is a place where I draw from my own experience. When I first began to study science, I felt, as many women often do, a call to service, a call to issues of health, and a call to issues of justice, a call to use my talents to make a difference in the world. I originally planned to be a doctor because I wanted to help people. I enrolled in engineering at Tulane, but it was engineering pre-med, and I found my interest pulled in that direction. You see, I initially thought that chemical engineering would mean spending my time in a lab or behind a desk. What I ended up studying were the many ways that chemicals can affect people and how they impact our environment and our health. I spent time with my boots on, going to work in the wetlands along the Gulf Coast. I went into communities and talked to people and their families, and I enjoyed understanding how the issues of science I was exploring in the classroom could have an effect on their lives. I was thinking about being a doctor because I wanted to help people by treating them when they got sick. I came to realize that if I studied chemical engineering and started working to protect our environment, I could help people by making sure they didn't get sick in the first place. Now, my mother still wanted me to be a doctor. In fact, for years, she asked me why in the world I took up engineering and this thing called environmental protection. She stopped asking that when President Obama called. My point is, thankfully, my point is the qualities that have traditionally discouraged young women from pursuing science, that we are not interested in a hard and cold and disconnected discipline, are a misinterpretation of both women and, of course, of science. In fact, I believe that these are exactly the reasons why we must welcome more women into scientific fields. To make that happen, we must change the perception that science is a man's field and that to be part of it, women will have to compromise their essential identities as women. I believe that could change the direction of science in this country. We may see more science aimed at protecting children's health. We know far too little about the factors that are affecting our children's physical and emotional development each and every day. We could find greater intermarriage of so-called hard science and social science disciplines as women come together in those disciplines as their numbers increase. For years, women have been saying that we need more women's voices in the discussions on women's health. And of course, it might just be that we will see greater science and greater numbers of women involved in the science that are used to make policy decisions around those issues. A living example of this is my own field of environmental protection. There is no doubt that environmental protection would not be where it is today without the extraordinary, groundbreaking scientific work of amazing women. Women like Sylvia Earle and Rachel Carson, whose book Silent Spring defined and changed environmentalism forever. The EPA has had 6 women serve in its highest office over the course of its 40-year history. Today, many of our senior managers are women, just as many of the scientific staff I have met and worked with in my years with the agency have been women. So let me close with one of the most well-known ideas in science, Newton's first law of motion. To paraphrase, an object that is at rest will stay at rest, and an object in motion will stay in motion unless an external force acts upon it. Cold, hard physics. We know it as a fact, just as we know that increasing the number of women in scientific fields will expand our baseline knowledge pool and add to the potential for new ideas and innovation. I like the law because it can also be applied to our culture. It is clear that women in science as an objective has been set in motion. The question is, how will it affect the field of science itself? What external forces can we exert to ensure the best outcome? We are in the midst of a profound change to our profession. Science is increasingly driving public policy and strengthening our society and our economy. For those reasons alone, it is critical that women play a role in scientific advances and that we educate and inspire a new generation of scientific leaders. And the changes we must make are both institutional and interpersonal. We must continue to open our doors at our universities and in the professional world for women to join leaderships, whether it be in physics or nanotechnology or chemical engineering. But we must also address the forces that prevent a 10-year-old girl from deciding that she is curious about science. We have to be diligent about the subtle but pervasive discouragement women can encounter when they think about taking a computer science class or want to learn more about physics or consider a career in robotics. I hope that all of you as graduates of this university and leaders in your own communities will take every opportunity to support this transformation. I don't know what the transformation will lead to. I hope you'll encourage and continue to encourage your daughters and your students to consider these fields and explore them to the fullest. I know if President Tillman has anything to do with it, you will. I also encourage the members of the Princeton community to use the national and international presence you have to continue to support women in science. And in all of this, I urge you to recognize that this is more than just a change in numbers and percentages. This is a change in how we approach science itself. It is not only about new possibilities for women in the existing field of science. This is about opening up the existing field of science to the new possibilities that women will most surely bring. Thank you again for a truly incredible honor. I'm really glad to be with you today. Thanks.
We do have time for questions. Right here.
Hi, I have a question for you. The EPA was created by a Republican administration under President Nixon. And I was wondering, what can we do to bring current day Republicans to take global warming as a serious issue?
Republicans, any answers? Okay, all right, I'll be serious. We gotta have a little fun here. But I don't, you know, it's about science to some degree, and it's about political science to the other degree, maybe. You know, I think that climate change and the issues of energy that are writ large in front of us every day has penetrated the American psyche. I think that despite efforts by skeptics, and I'll go so far as to say merchants of doubt, the American people are still, I think, mildly of the belief, the majority polls show, that the climate is changing. What they're asking for, though, is smart, sensitive public policy in answer to the question. And so I wonder, and I don't have data to show this, I wonder that over and over again, as we see people saying, yes, we believe clean energy and moving towards more sustainable energy forms has an important role to play in our country's future. It serves so many purposes, not only reducing climate forcers and climate gases in our atmosphere, that it's going to be important to start to talk to people, including conservatives, including of all political stripes, about the solution in a way that is not just about 2050 or 2030, or sadly so far away as to be affecting places like Africa and Asia, where many Americans will never get to see some of the things some of us have seen in terms of how the changing climate is impacting whole countries. So I think it's going to be important that we do three things. First is keep talking. Lift up our science, continue to do good science. You know, many of us thought that when the Berkeley study came out, which was a climate skeptic who reviewed the data with an eye towards disproving it and found that, and wrote in the Wall Street Journal that yes, the climate is changing, that the temperatures are indeed warming, that would be a moment. And yet the cacophony of voices just sort of took that and put it to the side. We don't seem to be able to move the people who are just convinced, but we can move the great many people who believe something is happening but want to be assured that there will not be responses that are so drastic as to affect our fragile economy in a way that makes it worse. And so many of the arguments I face are about, you know, job-killing EPA regulations. That's been the mantra, by the way, they're job-creating. But I think we have to talk about the solutions in ways that are reasonable and reasoned, rather than only focus. So that we have to keep focusing on science. We have to talk about the solutions. And last but not least is we should not overlook the extraordinary amount of work that's being done to move us to a lower carbon economy at the local level. Whether it's at the university level here, whether it's at the community level. I speak to people from communities that are as Republican, red, whatever moniker we want to give them, as anything, who are investing in efficiencies around energy and water in their community. or to students who are overwhelmingly interested in finding and being part of and making tons of money off the next generation of energy generation, distribution, and use. So all that's happening, and that is our classic democracy. It's interesting that this is the Madison Medal talk, federalism versus the states and local, but I think it's very important for us to let the states and locals be the laboratory and push the federal government, because there are some pretty big levers of opposition on the political science side that we're going to have to gently persuade, or maybe not so gently. Thank you.
Jeff Laurenti, Woodrow Wilson School 74, so asterisk, I guess. Following up on that, I wonder if we could ask you to talk a bit about the global side of those climate change negotiations, because the Obama administration has certainly turned a page on what had been the denial of its predecessor in global negotiations, and yet the U.S. still seems to be, together with China, the two major players reluctant to finally consummate a deal. What are the issues that have prevented the U.S. from being more in league, let's say, with the Europeans on targets, binding targets for emissions reductions? And what are the obstacles we face from the Chinese, the Indians, and the other players that are the emerging side? So if you could talk a bit about the global politics of climate change.
I can try. The president has named a climate envoy, Todd Stern, who works for Secretary of State Clinton, and he is the main negotiator, along with many of you may know Jonathan Pershing, who's the deputy and has been doing this for a long, long time with great integrity. It is quite complicated. The issues are around this president's fundamental belief that clean energy is important for the economic future of our country, but also the issues are defined and I guess in some ways informed. That would be the gentlest adjective I could use, is by the fact that we were not successful in convincing the U.S. Senate to pass Waxman-Markey or any bill, and we have not been successful in convincing the Congress to move towards a clean energy standard or any of the measures that the president's called for recently, from efficiency all the way through. We are right now at a point where we are, I think the president just yesterday or the day before in the energy speech called again for renewable of the tax credit, renewing the tax credits around clean energy, very important. And so that's where we are in terms of what we can deliver. So I know many of you have certainly noticed that in the president's mind, we have to do what we can with the authorities that currently exist. Part of the reason EPA is front and center is because one of the authorities that exists is the Clean Air Act. And I'm getting back to your question. I'm sorry. I know I'm domestic right now. But I say all that to say that, that's the real world that we're all living in, a world where we can go out on the international stage and make big promises, but it doesn't take very much research to realize that we cannot necessarily deliver those in the form of legislation. Now, there are some great things in our favor. The National Clean Cars Program, which is going to save billions and billions of barrels of oil just because our cars we're doubling gasoline mileage and, of course, increasing first ever regulations for CO2 equivalent emissions. The work that's happening on baseload generation, as we do finally see folks looking at these older power plants that are well past their useful life and either investing in them or in some cases deciding to retire and invest in newer generation. That gives us opportunity. And there's a ton of other things. So I think what's happening is that what the president has done, when he went to Copenhagen, he really did, I think save might be too strong a word, but he was instrumental in ensuring that the talks continued on. And in the last round in Durban, the agreement that was literally very last minute, for those of you who were there, better, I did not go, hammered out. It's fun to listen to the delegates tell their stories. I don't say I'm envious of a path forward to get to an agreement by 2020 is all a recognition of two things. We don't have an agreement today, but we can't stop in the meantime. And I think that both things are absolutely true. What's happening in China and India, I am less attuned to, except to say that as China continues to grow and develop, its issues around what we call conventional pollution are well documented and extremely well known. China, a country run by engineers, by the way, is acutely aware of their need to address those issues, and I think understands that. Well, I would be speaking for them. I will not say that they understand that their leadership on the world stage depends on looking forward, but I will say that they're acutely aware that they cannot continue to grow and claim that they're not growing and therefore can't address these issues. Without doubt, the Chinese government has done amazing things to move people out of poverty, but without a doubt, that's come at a cost. So those discussions will continue. I think the most optimistic piece came from Durban and a path forward that the world seems poised to address, and it happens to coincide with other issues that the Western Europe particularly are addressing that give a pause but not a timeout. Maybe not a pause, but a pause to the big thing, but not a timeout from all the work that would have to go to undergirding that.
Valerie Joseph,
Hi, Val.
class of '86, architecture major, and I have to admit, Lisa, I could call her a mentor, but that doesn't quite describe it. She's my big sister, she's family, love her dearly, haven't seen her in a long time, that's why I'm here. A more specific question, as you know, I'm from upstate New York, and I'm a small scale developer, grew up upstate. I'm curious to find out what's going on, because I don't hear anything in the press in terms of the cleanup that GE is supposed to be doing on the upper part of the Hudson River, because they were going to do it and then they stopped, and it's bad and it's good, and I really don't understand what's going on with that.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Val. Good to see you. Tell everybody hi. I'm sure we'll see you later. There's good news there. Last year, the years fly by. Either last year or the year before, at the end of the year, GE and EPA had been at a little bit of loggerheads. The issue was how much dredging versus how much capping, and we signed a decision, a federal decision document, that basically put the onus on GE to dredge more than it kept in place. And the issue has always been, in the process of dredging, do you resuspend so much of this PCB contaminated sediment that you actually have a bigger impact on the water column, as you know. The good news is that you don't, and that GE has stepped up to the plate. We, either last year or end of the year before, I cannot remember, agreed that they would go forward with the next round of dredging. There was some concern that they'd walk away and say, we tried and this didn't work, or we tried and we think it should be scaled back. They did not. It's well over, I think, $1 billion that they're spending. They just had a very successful season of dredging in the Hudson. This is the second season in a row. They'll be out again next year. They removed more than they thought and quicker than they thought. I think the estimate around jobs just for that project is several hundred. I want to say 700, but it could be a little lower than that. So it is an economic revitalizer right now because of the short-term jobs, and they're not that short-term. But of course, the hope is that first, the expertise that GE is accumulating. It's a wonderful story of what happens in this country. We will have now GE, one of our mightiest companies, with a real expertise around how to clean up a river, one of our mightiest rivers. And one would assume, knowing the history of our rivers, that they'll be able to sell that expertise, and we'll be thrilled to see them do it, because that means more clean rivers. So that's an economic engine, but of course you leave behind a Hudson that is now hopefully on its way to restoration and revitalizing the whole area. So thanks, it's a good news story, so far.
Upstairs. Okay, so your mic wasn't on, so I'm just gonna repeat your question a little bit. I think I heard it, and go like this if that wasn't your question. You said that part of the concern with job killing might be that it's not really transparent to the average person what these particles that are in the air that you really can't see anymore. It's not like the days when you could, literally look outside and see the pollution, although you still can if you know what you're looking for.
and how, can I be an advocate to make that non-transparent more transparent? Right? Basically, yeah, okay. Yes, I hope so. I mean, I am not without controversy myself, as you might have guessed. And part of it is because, and this was a decision for me. Last year, I penned an op-ed called "Too Dirty to Fail." It was meant to be a little provocative, to really call out the fact that there have been, about last year's Congress voted against environmental protection laws to undermine them or to just downright overturn or change them 200 times. The vast majority of Americans don't know that, and in fact, poll after poll shows that the vast majority of Americans think you need an EPA, you need a strong presence to ensure that the rules are fair, that their health and their family's health and the environment have a seat at the table, because in our system of capitalism, there really is no way to take these external costs and internalize them except through standard setting for companies. So I talk a lot about it. I will say this, probably to me the most difficult part of life inside the Washington Beltway, and when I say Washington Beltway, I include the virtual blogosphere is that it is very difficult to combat those who speak without any fact whatsoever. I'm trying to be kind. But boy, are there a lot of them, and boy, did they do it. You heard the dean speak about our mercury rules. What happens is that over time, they just keep asking for more and more analysis and data and analysis and data. And believe it or not, because of the extraordinary economists and scientists at EPA and the consultants we hire, we keep rising to the challenge. EPA does much more thorough economic analysis, health analysis, epidemiological analysis, morbidity analysis, jobs analysis. We've added jobs analysis than we've ever done in our 41-year history. And yet, no matter how much we do, they take those studies, they're peer-reviewed, no matter how many ways we try to do them, they throw them aside, and they pick up something by, somebody who says, well, I was in LA, and the air seemed fine to me, and there is some coughing, but I don't get it. It literally is where we are. I mean, I know I am exaggerating slightly, but not a whole lot. I mean, I will have hearings this week, my budget hearings, and without doubt, I will be attacked for regulating mercury. Mercury's not so bad. There's only 50 tons of it. What's the matter? Why are you regulating mercury and having co-benefits for soot and smog? Soot is a cause of premature death in our country. It's been over and over again linked through all kinds of studies to premature heart attack, stroke, high blood pressure, and more and more. I don't understand how it happens. I bet some do, but I don't. But why are you, well, you say 11,000 lives saved, but that's not because of mercury. It's true. Mercury is a neurotoxin. It doesn't kill you, it just makes you dumber. So, factual statement, ladies and gentlemen. So that's what we're dealing with. And it's going to require, I mean, we have started now to build broader coalitions. We deal with, we had a coalition when we announced the mercury rule. We had the Evangelical Environmental Network. They asked to come and join us on the stage. They got attacked because they care, because for them, it's an issue of unborn children who are poisoned with mercury. And they were then told that that's not real pro-life, that's fake pro-life. Pro-life is abortion and mercury is not. I mean, that's what we're dealing with. So I will try, but we're going to need folks to speak up. And over again, when the American people speak up, they're very clear that this is not hard. They want their voices heard. The voice that's being heard inside the Washington Beltway is lobbyists and money.
Wow. Good morning. Congratulations, Lisa. Gabriella Morris, class of 77. You just alluded to some of the things I wanted to ask you about. You played New Jersey politics. That's a blood sport. With all that you have to do, wife and mother, how do you balance it all? And what's life like from the political standpoint in terms of how you handle all of that rancorous debate?
How do I handle all the rigorous debate, you said? Rancorous debate. The wife, mom, balancer is right here. Thank you, darling. I'll say 3 other things about that because I speak to young women all the time. I mean, my mom worked on and off as a secretary when I was in school, and that meant my grandmother had to come over and be there because they insisted that someone was home when we got home from school, and lots of phone calls and no homework help. Even if she could, she would often say, I can't help you with this, but she wasn't home. My dad worked 2 jobs. But now there's Skype and text and email me and let me take a look at it, and a wonderful partner and my husband who makes sure someone's home as he's working at home to be there with the kids, and that's how it happens. I mean, I think the real extraordinary women in that regard were the first generations who really were physically trying to be in 2 places at one time, whereas now I can virtually be in a number of places at one time, and I'm just very fortunate and blessed in that way. From the standpoint of rancor, I try to keep a sense of humor. I really do think there are 2 things, and it'll be interesting to see the folks are now calling. They're sort of saying that, you guys have to be tougher on her. I think that it does not help to rise to the level of nastiness that some of us have faced. I've been called names. I've been told that I have no common sense. I've been told that I don't tell the truth. I've been told that it's my goal to destroy industry in America. I've been called a communist. I've been called, all of these things by people who've either never met me or had a conversation. They've been told. They've been told by their #1 source of information these days, which is the blogosphere. Someone else they've never met, probably, but someone whose visions they ascribe to. I don't think it helps to go there. And I think that, the classic political thinking always is that folks overreach. And the American people are decent and good and look at the whole thing, especially right now what's going on in Congress. And there's a reason why they don't have much faith that anything will get done. So it's hard. I mean, the hearings I have this week, we were teasing. They're budget hearings. I doubt we'll get very many budget questions, except why do you still have a budget? But I'll be from the Republican side. And we'll get help from our friends and leaders. We have some extraordinary leaders on the Democratic side. But I don't want it to be partisan. It just means that you have to, for me anyway, I'll just put it this way. For me, I have an incredibly strong belief that the work I do is reasonable and smart, but also extraordinarily important to the American people. And I'm not a crusader, and I'm not a Joan of Arc, but I came there to do a job. The law says that we should have clean air and clean water and clean land at the same time as we grow, and there's no reason we can't. There's no reason we can't.
Upstairs.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Ooh, I can hear me. I'm Florence Hudson, class of '80 mechanical and aerospace engineer, so we're kindred spirits. And I am an avid advocate for getting more women into science, engineering, and technology, just like you. And Shirley and I just spoke about this a month ago, that the engineering students here today are shocked that there aren't more women in leadership or even in the science, technology, engineering, and math fields. So I have a question for you. What can we really do? The numbers haven't changed a lot, the reality hasn't changed a lot, the culture hasn't changed a lot. Should there be an administrator for STEM that has a director working for them that works with women or works for other underrepresented minorities here? Is there something more we could do here? And I might contact you because we're working on something here at Princeton, but what can we really do?
Yeah. You mean here at the university, right?
Oh, here at the university, at the federal level, I'm very flexible here.
Okay.
There's a lot that needs to be done, and some of the numbers have improved since, I was matriculating and MIT was 4%, now it's 45%, but some of that is because of the soft sciences, nothing personal. They kind of changed the pie. But what can we really do at the university level, at the federal level? What would really be a catalyst and help us make this change?
Well, I think It's such a broad question. Let me start with the university level because it's easier to think about. I definitely think that, WISE, Women in Science and Engineering, and groups similarly, which I won't remember all the names of, are extremely important. I think that, I think there needs to be, like any affinity group, a place where feeling different maybe is okay in terms of the culture. That's what I was trying to get at with the culture. My classmates are, I hope Jeff is here. Where's Jeff? Hey, Jeff. I never felt like my classmates discriminated against me in any way. I mean, I think we had one or two women, Jennifer and I, in our sort of cohort of chemical engineering classes. That wasn't the issue. I think, and it's hard for me to separate femaleness from being, an African-American kid from New Orleans, a very different city than Princeton was back in the early 80s. Hell, a very different city than it is right now. I mean, New Orleans is very different than Princeton. So I think that you need to find a place and a way, and I tell this to young women all the time in the work context, that the first time, the times in the very beginning when you have that seed of doubt, that I'm not good enough, or I don't do it their way, or they're asking me to think about it their way, but I really am interested in this, or all they're looking at is this, but what about that? And maybe your advisor, who, let's face it, is God when you're a graduate student, and that's the system, doesn't see it that way, that you can have that conversation with others to help you figure out how to move that needle a bit. That's the system. And so I don't know what that means or how that plays out, but I think that's the key. At the federal level, I think investing in science, when we see the numbers that we're talking about, is going to mean we see increases in that direction. And I did an interesting interview the other day with a young woman. She's doing her undergraduate thesis at Georgetown on science and women in engineering, and she was asking about the high school level. I do happen to think that going to an all-girls high school was very helpful to me, because I didn't face those issues of worrying about whether the guys thought I wasn't cool enough for school. But I think I think the first and most important thing is that we have to change the thinking about it. I think we're on the way. When you look at, don't kill me, but they say that CSI and those CSI shows are the greatest influencer of kids that are driving them back to science. And we have to insist that Hollywood, as they're doing for the most part, make sure that those characters are equally glamorous. They're all glamorous, but that the women glamorous scientists, there's always a woman in the back with a white coat on it. She's like the forensic woman. I think all that's about changing views, and it will take a long time. I mean, and I'm calling for a transformation that says, first off, maybe the innovations will not just be in the hard sciences, but in the combination of the social sciences with the hard sciences, or sustainability, which requires that you think about all these different bottom lines and building in a different sort of process up front in science that takes that into account early enough on that you don't need to regulate on the back end. So I digress. I'm rambling, but I haven't thought a whole lot about it. It's not my area of expertise, but I know there are those moments. Happens in a woman's career too. The first time you're made to feel guilty about wanting to choose family or make a choice. There needs to be a structure in place that says, don't you dare take that out. Let me build this back up, and let's get you back on the road again. And that's really important.
One last question.
Jim Waltman, class of '86, and huge Lisa Jackson fan.
Hey.
And I want to start by just thanking you for all you did for New Jersey's environment, particularly our water. Those of us who work professionally to protect New Jersey's environment miss you dearly, I will add. And this is a more hopeful question perhaps than some before. I'm curious which technical innovations you are most hopeful about and think have the greatest prospects for addressing the climate problem? And would you invest, if you had another $10 billion, to invest in technology?
Oh, wow, that's interesting. The climate problem, you say. I thought you were going to say the environmental problem. Because I'll put climate in the back brain. I think a lot about the environmental issues that we face, or how we get to a place where folks can, with a straight face, make an argument that we're done, and so we no longer need, an EPA. We hear that a lot. And it's because pollution isn't as visible. Lakes aren't on fire. You can see the sun at noon. Important. Pollution's down by half, by the way, because the Clean Air Act, not by accident, not just because. So I've often thought that the most important environmental law we have is the Right to Know Act. That communities, oh, there you are. I was looking up there. That communities protect themselves when they find out that there's a problem. And no community likes to feel like they're being dumped on, not just environmental justice communities. So I think advances in monitoring that give every person the ability to understand exactly what they're breathing all day, you carry this little thing around with you all day, I was telling my husband, and yet would empower people to be like, oh, hold it, it's okay, but I don't know. Or, involving people in a much more sort of grassroots way and understanding their local environment or issues is very important. So I think making monitoring much, much cheaper and much, much more personal is really important. And we're getting there, and I think that we should do more of it. On the larger technology side, I think we have an engineering lab in Cincinnati, so I visited them early on. They're our peeps, right? So we went there and we formed a water innovation cluster. There's lots of VC money and lots of folks investing on the private side in water, but it doesn't take a whole lot of thinking to realize that the climate problem manifests itself as a water problem, and too much, too little. And so I think any investments there are extremely important. Last thing I'll say is I haven't spent most of my time looking at the kinds of things that might be hugely important other than the traditional cleaner energy, more energy efficiency side. But one thing we did recently with Secretary Clinton is this short-lived climate pollutant initiative. It's voluntary, it's small, but it goes to another more important issue. For many Americans, especially environmental justice communities, they sometimes feel like what we're doing is declaring victory on issues that they know darn good and well we're not finished with, sort of more conventional pollution, and moving on to the sexy new thing of climate and CO2. And that feels like an us versus them. And I think we need to get back to innovations that address pollution, like especially black carbon, but I would also call it soot, fine particle pollution. Huge health benefits, trillions worldwide, trillions of dollars, I think, worldwide in terms of health. Extremely important for developing nations, which are becoming more and more urbanized every second. And a really important short-lived climate force, especially around the Arctic. So if you can focus on pollution that is carbon pollutant driven, I think you start to answer one of our first questions, which is that buy-in again, making people understand why this matters. Methane is that way as well. It's also an ozone precursor, so it has some smog implications. And of course, HFCs and other chemicals like that. So I think anything you can do in that buys us a little bit of time, especially if you can get real impact around managing methane, such an important issue, really important in this state because we're a lot of people and densely populated and we generate a lot of waste. I would love to see continued innovation around that, not just landfills, but the next several steps. Thank you all again very much.
Thank you.